Thank you all for joining. Um, I know a bunch of you. Some of you we haven't met. My name is Alex Joseph, and I'm one of the co-founders of SensIQ Nootropics and Adaptogens. I'm really excited to have you here as Dr. Barr, as well as Dr. Callahan, who unfortunately couldn't make it today. They really did some amazing work on putting together for our Focus formula. Really impressive data. And so thank you for joining. At the end, I'll jump back on. But for the most part, this is going to be Dr. Barr or Luke's presentation. And so, Luke, I'm going to let you take it away as long as if there are any issues, no one can't hear me or any of the mics. I mean, just again, in the chat box on the right, just say something. We will ask for some participation. And so just enter it in the chat since I know most of you should be muted. So sounds good. And thank you again, Luke, Dr. Barr, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Alex. And thank you all for joining us tonight. I'm sure you've seen, tonight's webinar is going to focus, no pun intended, on our focus formulation and a study that we're very, very proud of. And we're going to take a little closer look at that, as well as some of the general challenges in today's world with attention. So let's take a look at our first slide, and we'll just give a kind of brief overview about SensIQ. So, as some of you may know, if you met us at A4M out in Las Vegas or even in another show, one of the things that I'm super excited about and very proud to be a part of the SensIQ company is that we're specialized primarily in cognitive health. As you may have seen in some of the invitations, I'm a board certified neurologist. This is really my primary interest is brain health, and probably the unique function of the human brain, in addition to all of the other miracles that it does, is our ability to think. So cognition is absolutely critical for us as individuals, as a species, and being primarily focused on that as a company is something that really drew me to SensIQ and really made me excited to be a part of the team. The other thing that's extremely unique about us is that we're formulated by doctors and practitioners for doctors and practitioners. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that we take the best ingredients that we can find, we find the ones with the best data, and we think about that rationally and try to put them together in a synergistic fashion, whether that's grouping nootropics and adaptogens or pure constant formulations of one or the other. Although nothing in our lineup is uniquely just nootropics and adaptogens just yet, that's not something that we're going to rule out. And as we talked about by doctors for doctors, we are exclusively through healthcare practitioners. That was another thing that was extremely interesting to me, and one of the main draws that made me excited to join SensIQ is because as a physician myself and as clinicians, I'm sure you've all seen this, it's so critical to have that patient-doctor relationship and to really understand and know what our patients are getting. So by having it exclusively through the practitioner, we're able to maintain that patient-practitioner partnership that's absolutely critical to compliance, outcomes, and overall well-being. Touching on that a little bit more in depth is that we're a true pharmaceutical-grade product. What do I mean by that? Well, one of the unique things about SensIQ is that we are third-party tested, third-party verified, made in America, and our quality control is so tight that you can actually titrate these formulations in discussion with your patients that you hit that sweet spot where they have the maximum benefit with the least side effects. So let's take a look at our next slide, and we'll touch on some of these factors in a little more depth. So as we were talking about is pharmaceutical grade nutraceuticals. We, again, use third-party testing, and many pieces do, but what does that mean? Not everybody does the same thing. We're GMP certified in an FDA registered facility with the highest level of accreditation that you can get, which is NSF. And we look at not only heavy metals, and among those are sort of your usual suspects, lead, cadmium, arsenic, etc. We also look at microorganisms like E. coli, salmonella. So you can be assured that your patients are getting this very high quality product that's very clean and is tested to be free of all these particular contaminants. So there's less things for you to think about if they start to have a side effect. You don't have to be worrying, is this a contamination issue with heavy metals? Is this an infection issue with something like Salmonella or E. coli? Because we are verifying that on such a high quality scale, that's one less thing for you to worry about and one less thing that's going to put your patients at risk. We're also non-GMO and vegan for those of us who find that important as well. So let's take a look at our team in the next slide. And here you see me, but we also have a number of others on our team. And we really like to take a multidimensional approach and find solutions-oriented formulations. So we're looking at things through the lens of psychology, through the lens of general wellness, through the lens of internal medicine, as well as through the lens of nutrition, because a lot of our issues ultimately are nutritional. And we want to make sure that we're not just focusing on one person's vision, but having a collaborative effort to maximize those effects. So we'll talk a little bit more in the next slide about the overall problem of attention in the modern world. So let's move on to our next slide, please. I'm sure that many people on the webinar today were in clinic today. I know one of the most common complaints that I get when I'm working is, Doc, I'm really struggling to stay focused, whether that's in my life or at work. And to be honest, I feel like we've probably all been there. I've had times myself where I'm not quite as attentive, quite as sharp as I want to be. And I still like to think that I'm performing to a certain standard, but I know that I'm not quite performing at my best. And I'm sure that that's something we can all relate to. If you look at CDC data about distractibility, 15 million people, adults in America, are diagnosed with ADHD. If you look at it on a per prescription basis, that's up 20% almost. That's a very, very significant increase. And a lot of people are saying, why is this? What's going on? And I think the answer is right in front of us, honestly, if we look around. We have a 24-hour news cycle. We have a highly competitive environment. We've got all of these apps that are constantly having us look here, look there, not to mention the fact that when we're engaged in our professional lives, we've got a million different alarms, a million different meetings, all of these different things constantly drawing our attention in more and more directions. And we're constantly having to prioritize and triage what's going to get our focus and how much focus are we going to attend to it. If you look at some corporate data, some of the studies suggest it's 90+% of people are struggling with focus on a day-to-day basis. And some of it even says we're basically turning into goldfish. I saw one study came out based on marketing data that says that if you don't have somebody's attention within 4 seconds, you're not going to have them at all. And you got 4 seconds plus another 30 or so seconds to drive home your message. So all the data is suggesting that we're constantly being distracted and we're having a harder and harder time maintaining our focus to achieve difficult tasks for a number of reasons. But one of the major ones is a social and environmental change where we have constant stimulus from different areas that require reprioritization and retriage of our thought process. So let's take a look at our next slide. Touching back a little bit on the ADHD sort of pandemic amongst adults and the rise in prescriptions, those prescription medications are extremely powerful, and for the right person, they're absolute miracles. But a lot of people aren't quite reaching to the threshold of having a diagnosis, but they still need some help. And then some people who need a diagnosis may not be able to tolerate some of those side effects. And I'm sure that we've all seen some of those side effects in our clinic. Generally, we can cluster them into four major groups: behavioral, cardiovascular, GI, and neurological. And some of these can range from benign to extremely serious. One of the most serious ones on the behavioral side is habit formation and addiction. These medications, while extremely powerful and extremely beneficial for a lot of people, do have the potential for addiction. And many people can succumb to that, and many people want to avoid that and so stay off of them altogether, even though they may need something of pharmaceutical strength. Another common behavioral issue is sleep disturbance. And then a very common one is appetite loss or weight loss. On the cardiovascular perspective, a very, very common one, probably the most common one that I see, is cold sensation in the hands and feet. And that's pretty mild. Most people just deal with it. You can, put your hands in your pockets, make a fist, what have you. But there's serious ones as well. Rhythm issues, heart attack, chest pain. These can be very serious and get us into a lot of trouble very quickly. On the neurological side, confusion can be quite common, or irritability and anxiety. Those are on the mild side. A little bit more moderate could be headache or tremor. And on the severe side, I've seen it many times, and I'm sure some of you have all seen it, is seizures. And of course, you've got certain benign things like GI upset, nausea, and diarrhea, which oftentimes will make somebody want to forego a medication if they've been on it and have those kinds of things. So while these medications are extremely powerful and have a lot of great benefits, they also have a pretty significant side effect profile that a lot of people either don't want to be exposed to or want an alternative for. And that's in addition to what we talked about previously about not everybody meeting a diagnosis. That's one of the reasons behind our focus formulation, which we'll take a look at in the next slide. So our focus formulation, as you can see, has got a number of different components, both nootropics and adaptogens. And I'm sure that many of you are familiar with some of these, and for many of you, some of these may be new. But we wanted to combine different things because we know that, let's just face it, we're all human. I find it hard enough to stick to something for a few weeks if I'm not feeling an effect and seeing a benefit, let alone a few months, which a lot of data suggests is what you need to get the memory and cognitive benefits from something like lion's mane. So just from a human perspective, we can improve compliance by having something that can kick in immediately. And on that side, we've got the nootropics. So among them, we've got a number of different ones that we'll discuss in the next slide. But as you can see, we've got rhodiola, bacopa, caffeine's a very well-known one for thousands of years. Theobromine also tends to be quite well known. And these all have different mechanisms. And we'll touch on all of that in the next slide. But the most important thing is the synergies. So let's take a look at those in the next slide. So here they've been split up into groups, both fast acting and long acting, as well as some examples of some of the synergies. So as we talked about, lion's mane, great long-term supplement, can help with mood, memory, a lot of data suggesting that it improves neurogenesis through neuron growth factor. But again, that's going to take several months to really kind of get those benefits. And something like rhodiola can improve our mood and physiological stress response a little bit more quickly, even though it's also got long-term benefits. Something like theanine is going to give us, again, focus, attention, and mood benefits on a much more immediate fashion than something like bacopa or lion's mane. One that's maybe new to some people is alpha GPC, which is an acetylcholine precursor. And as many of you, I'm sure, are familiar, acetylcholine is one of the main neurotransmitters in the body, both in the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. And I kind of think about it as the three M's: motivation, mood, and memory. If you want to look at in the peripheral nervous system, you can add a fourth M, which is muscle. It's critical for our muscular function at the neuromuscular junction. And this is something that works, again, a little bit faster than some of the longer acting components. Pterostilbene is another extremely powerful formula compound that again works on the longer term, and that actually works through transcription factors. So of course, that's going to take a lot longer to kind of build up into an effect in the body. But if we can combine it with something that's faster acting like theanine or caffeine, well, then you're getting that immediate benefit so that something's working, as well as encouraging you to stay on it over the long term so that pathway can actually go on. And that's mediated through something called NRF2, which goes into an antioxidant pathway primarily through superoxide dismutase, but there's a number of other ones as well. And obviously, the research in all of these is ongoing. So it's an extremely exciting time that we're learning more and more about both the bench side of how these are working as well as the clinical side. And we're very proud to be doing our part to kind of expand the knowledge base overall. Any questions about this particular slide, just go ahead and throw them in the comments, and we'll take a moment or two to see if anything comes up. Otherwise, if you're thinking about it, we can discuss it towards the end, and we can always come back to it. All right, I'm not seeing anything, so let's go ahead and take a look at the next slide, which is actually a picture
I'll
of
just,
me. Yep.
just if anyone has any questions, again, on the chat bar on the right, just click chat and then you just type it in there. Again, we'll continue. If there's questions, we'll always bring it over. And we'll, as we dive in, you could ask it at the end.
Thanks, Alex. So if we take a look at the next slide, you see a picture of me from around 11:30 yesterday morning, right before lunch. I'm sure we've all been there. And it's a very common saying, so much to do, so little time, right? So we're constantly being pulled in different directions in modern life. Going back to that same concept that we were talking about, we've got personal needs, we've got our own wants, we've got hobbies, we've got professional commitments, we've got family commitments, we've got health commitments. And this forces us to constantly change our focus and constantly triage how much attention we're going to pay to any one thing. And this can be a source of fatigue. It can be a source of reduced focus and overall reduced cognitive efficiency. And a number of the compounds that we were looking at in the previous slide have been studied and have really excellent data behind them. But if you look at those studies very closely, you'll see that they're very, very controlled. And that's great. It's a great way to get a baseline on things, but we wanted to do something that was a little bit more real world. So we thought long and hard about what kind of sample would allow us to get a real world efficacy data point. So let's go ahead and take a look at the next slide. And here you see me at around 12:30 last night, shortly after midnight. Only kidding. Although I did have a beard about a week ago. And after a lot of thinking, we came to the conclusion that doctoral students offer really a kind of perfect group to take a look at. Yes, we've all been there. Absolutely. So, why are doctoral students such a great group? Well, it's all the things that we were just talking about. Highly competitive, lots of time, mandatory performance, lots of commitments that are often competing, and very tight scheduling. And, you know, I went to medical school. A lot of you are practitioners that have gone through nursing school or med school or DO school or chiropractic or what have you. And we all know how difficult it is, how it would be great to have something that could kind of help us zero in and laser focus on what we've got to do right that second, rather than thinking about, oh, I've got to study for this test. Oh, I've got that report. Oh, I've got to get to the gym. Oh, I got to make dinner. All of these different distractions to really kind of key us in. So doctoral students represented a group that gave us a level of control where everybody had more or less the same exposure, but at the same time had that real world challenge that we've discussed. And we decided to look at this with a crossover study, and we figured go big or go home. Let's look at biochemistry. I don't know about everybody else, but biochemistry I found was very, very difficult. So, Alex was a little bit worried about going for it, but looking at the data that we have, looking at the formulation that we have, I say we go for it. So we finally were able to convince them to do that. And we're going to get into that a little bit more in the next couple of slides. So let's take a look at the next slide. So, I had mentioned the word crossover study, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, but I will go into it a bit more to refresh anyone's memory. So in a crossover study, you have a sample of multiple groups. In our case, we use two groups, and each group is exposed to both the formulation or the treatment at different times. So you're going to measure one group on the formulation and then off the formulation, and you're going to measure the other group off the formulation and then on the formulation. And when they cross over, you're going to be able to see what kind of difference there was. And that gives you a higher ability to see if there is a significant effect and also a truer assessment of something's efficacy. And we partnered with Campbellsville University to do this. As we talked about, they were doctoral students. And as we mentioned, it was in biochemistry, and we assessed them on their own actual test scores, obviously de-identified, and we're able to measure that both group to group and group on and group off of the focus formulation. So let's take a look at the next slide and see how we kind of broke it down. As you can imagine, some of this is going to be split up into a couple of different phases. Obviously, the first one would be to collect the participants. And in our particular case, they fell into a standard performing group and a high performing group. We had the standard performing group on the focus formulation first, and they stayed on it for 1 week. At the end of 1 week, they came off of the focus formulation, and the high performing group then started it. And our participants were instructed to take the focus formulation 1 hour prior to the biochemistry examinations. So after 2 weeks, we'd collected of all of their data, and we were able to then assess it both on and off within group, as well as group to group, and see what they came. And the results were extremely exciting, even even more exciting than I kind of anticipated. So let's take a look at those, and I'm sure that you all will see what was interesting as well as I did. So as we talked about, we had a standard performing group and a high performing group, and they're outlined in different colors. In the first chart on the left, you'll notice that there's an inflection point around day 5 to 6. So if we take that back to the beginning, we'll see that there's a pretty significant difference between the high performing group and the standard performing group. As the standard performing group stayed on the focus supplement, you can see the performance begin to increase and then eventually surpasses the high performing group. After a couple more days, we had that crossover, which you can see in the next graph. And even though the standard performing group has come off of the focus formulation, their improvement in performance was actually maintained for several days. Of course, once the high performing group started on it, they again began to achieve consistently higher scores than our standard performing group. But if you look overall, that difference was significantly less than before the standard performing group was exposed. So what is this telling us? This is telling us, one, that there's a very rapid effect. Two, that that effect is clearly measurable. And three, that it's sustained. Another thing that I found pretty impressive was that you had a pretty significant improvement, regardless of whether you were an average Joe or a superstar. So for me, that was one of the major points of the study. So let's take a look at the next slide, and we'll look at this in a little bit more kind of broad strokes. I had mentioned that they were instructed to take the focus formulation 1 hour prior to their biochemistry tests. And when we crunched all of the numbers, you can see it right here, 75%. 75% had a measurable increase in their performance. So that's a very fast action and a very significant response. If you look at the raw numbers group to group, our standard performing group had an average increase of 27% better score. The high performance group had a 17% on average better score compared to when they weren't taking focus supplement. So very substantial gains very quickly. And as we saw in the previous slide, also sustained. So very interesting data. Just thinking about this, how powerful this formulation is. We're talking about a full letter grade for both groups. I know that if I could have taken a pill to improve a full letter grade and really not have any significant side effects, that would have been a big help for some of the more rigorous coursework that I had to complete. I can only speak for myself about that, but I'm pretty sure a lot of us are in the same boat. So really tremendously powerful formula, really amazing results. Again, full letter grades for both the standard performing and the high performing group. And again, within just 1 hour of taking the formulation. So very powerful, very fast acting, and really encouraging if somebody feels like they're going to want to stay on this long term to know that they're getting those results. So let's take a look at our next slide and some of the key takeaways about what we've just discussed. So obviously, looking at the data, SensIQ Focus rapidly and significantly improves our ability to focus in on complex tasks in real world conditions. And you can see these results as quickly as 1 hour. But if you want to do longer term measurements, it seems like there's a very, very strong signal there as well, that this is something that is going to continue to build and continue to improve performance over the long term, which is what this formulation was designed to do. So really, really exciting, very powerful stuff. This is going to work for somebody, whether they're, you know, turbo or regular speed. Both the high performance and the standard performing groups benefited significantly. And overall, the difference in cognition and the difference in scores was reduced between the high performing and the standard performing participants with the supplementation. And getting back to the importance of the crossover study, by being able to look at the group to group and within group changes, we're able to get a really, really strong signal with a smaller sample size that this is a true result and is actually having a very significant impact. So overall, very, very happy with these results, very, very pleased to be sharing them with you. And it's a very exciting time in medicine generally, as well as in the kind of nutraceutical supplementation, cognition, neurotropic space, where we're continuing to build this knowledge basis, not just for SensIQ's, internal use, but also for everybody out there, so that more and more people are able to think about these and understand the different options that are available for people that may need something to improve their cognitive capabilities because of our current modern life. So as we talked about, we are primarily focused on cognition. And in the next slide, we see a number of different solutions-oriented formulations that we've got, whether that's for memory or longevity, sleep. We have a very powerful formulation for sleep that we're actually doing a study on right now. And I believe at the end, Alex will have a QR code for you in case you feel like you may want to participate or refer anybody for participation. We can certainly, set that up for you all. But the idea is to continue to grow the knowledge basis through rigorous clinical study and to continue to communicate and educate and partner with practitioners out there so that everybody is aware of these newer options that are coming out. And we're finally at a place where, particularly with SensIQ, where the quality control over the product is to such a degree where you can actually measure the effects in a very robust way. And moreover, you're able to have that very in-depth discussion with your patients about risk, benefits, and alternatives, because you know exactly what's in that formulation, exactly the dose that they're going to be getting, and you can therefore titrate that to maximize the benefits and minimize the side effects. Any questions about any of that?